Looking out over the Marina Bay sands and the surrounding waterfront, you are looking at a manufactured landscape. A quarter of this country's visible ground did not naturally exist 60 years ago. Engineers build land through a brutally simple process. They erect a barrier in shallow waters and pour in imported material, layer by layer, until the ocean floor rises above the waves and becomes buildable real estate. This instinct to remake the landscape dates back to the 1820s, when laborers leveled a small hill to fill the swampy south bank of the Singapore River and lay down solid commercial ground. This map shows the modern era's unprecedented explosion of growth. Since gaining independence in 1965, the sovereign territory increased from 580 to over 730 square kilometers, a 25% expansion. A tiny nation with virtually no natural resources solved its most pressing limitation by treating its sovereign borders as a negotiable suggestion rather than a permanent limit. In 1965, the young country faced an extreme geographic deficit. It sought to build a global shipping hub and a financial capital on a landmass smaller than most major cities. To create space, they poured dirt into the ocean. The vast runways of Changi Airport sit squarely on reclaimed earth, requiring enough fill to bury a small city. Off the southwestern coast, engineers filled the sea between 7 scattered islets, fusing them into a single massive landmass known as Jurong Island to host a dense global petrochemical complex. The drive to secure a prosperous economic future demanded staggering volumes of earth. Singapore had to dig up the terrain of its neighbors to redraw its own map. You cannot build a modern city out of any dirt you find. The fine, rounded grains of desert sand are too smooth. When mixed into concrete, they slide past each other, unable to lock together and bear weight. Expanding a map requires angular, irregular sand. That specific material only exists in finite deposits, slowly formed by rivers and coastlines over thousands of years. Singapore leveled its own hills and dredged its own waters decades ago. Running out of domestic supply, it purchased a reported 517 million tons of sand from neighboring countries over the last 20 years. To meet that demand, industrial fleets descended on the region. Heavy dredging vessels extract millions of tons of sediment from the rivers of Cambodia and the coastlines of Indonesia. The physical consequences of this extraction are absolute. Off the coast of Indonesia, entire low-lying islands have been scraped down to the waterline and completely erased from the map. For the communities living nearby, the loss of these natural storm barriers means violent waves push further inland. Beaches retreat meter by meter, taking local infrastructure and farmland with them. Geography has become a zero-sum game. Raising a wealthy skyline in one country physically shrinks the coastline of another. This map tracks the geopolitical backlash. Neighboring governments began leveraging their raw earth as a foreign policy tool. Supplier nations steadily shut down legal exports. Malaysia banned sand in 1997. Indonesia and Vietnam followed in the 2000s, and Cambodia finalized a permanent ban in 2017. But lines on a map rarely stop a lucrative market. Smuggling networks quickly formed. Fleets continued to dredge illegally, mislabeling shipments and rerouting cargo through third countries to keep the sand flowing. When a resource becomes essential to a nation's physical survival, legal boundaries bend to accommodate the financial demand. Sand, a seemingly endless material, turned into a highly restricted contraband. This appetite for earth extends far beyond Southeast Asia. Dubai dredged so aggressively to build its artificial islands that it exhausted accessible marine deposits, forcing a desert city to import suitable sand from Australia. Between 1970 and 2020, global demand for sand and gravel multiplied 5-fold, now consuming roughly 50 billion tons a year. We extract this material vastly faster than natural geological processes can replace it. Humanity's booming urban centers are caught in a deficit, scraping riverbeds bare to feed concrete mixers. The modern world is built by spending a finite, slow-forming resource as if it were infinite, leaving the most vulnerable, low-lying communities to pay the hidden environmental costs. Caught between a shrinking supply and closed borders, Singapore engineers initiated a dramatic pivot around 2016, adopting a technique known as polder reclamation.
Instead of piling sand until it breaches the surface, construction crews build a sturdy, watertight dike around a shallow section of sea. They pump the water out, leaving the exposed seabed dry, but maintained permanently below sea level. This Dutch-inspired method requires a fraction of the raw material for traditional infilling. A network of drains and pumping stations keeps the territory stable. The shift in architecture acts as a physical admission. The era of limitless resource extraction has ended, and future expansion must be built smarter, using significantly less earth. We tend to view solid ground as the ultimate permanent fixture, but standing on an engineered waterfront reveals how temporary the shoreline actually is. Physical maps no longer serve merely as a record of the natural world. They function as a real-time ledger of what we are powerful and wealthy enough to manufacture. Geography is a negotiable commodity. Our physical borders are limited only by the amount of earth we are willing to move.